My name is Manichaikul. I'm an associate professor in the Center for Public Health Genomics at the University of Virginia. Basically, I call myself a statistical geneticist. So my training is in biostatistics, and I use that kind of biostatistics expertise that I have to do analysis of genetic studies where we have genomic DNA, genotype, or DNA information on thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. And then we also have phenotypic information that tells us whether those people got diseases, what kind of risk factors they had. And then we try to use that information to identify regions of the genome and particular DNA variants that would predispose people for risk of particular diseases. So when I was in high school, I didn't think I was that interested in biology, but I happened to be growing up pretty close to the NIH. I happened to find a mentor there. So my mentor was at the National Institute on Deafness and Communication Disorders. So he was doing studies of deafness and communication disorders, but actually he himself was a geneticist. So it was through him that I got exposure to the field of genetics. And also, he sort of showed me that genetics was a really mathematical field. That's not something that I would have known, I think, without actually doing that research. I got a chance to kind of analyze some of the data sets, and I think that was something really cool for me and kind of led me into being interested in statistics. I didn't really see myself as somebody doing wet lab experiments, so it sort of fell into place. I know that genetics uses a lot of data analysis, so that seems like a good fit for me. One of my favorite classes that I took in college was Introduction to Probability. That professor, he sort of knew that a lot of the students weren't interested in his class, so sometimes he would tell these anecdotes about sort of like ways in which statistics comes into regular life. So he was like, statisticians can pick the next best stock picks. Or he would tell us things like, you can get in a helicopter on top of the highway between Berkeley and Stanford at rush hour and like look at the patterns of the cars moving during a traffic jam. And like those patterns may look random, but if you know statistics, you can actually like model the way the cars are moving and stuff. And I remember just thinking like the stories he was telling were really cool. Things have sort of gone better for this field than I would have expected in a lot of ways. Basically, over the past 10 years, we've been doing a lot of what we call genome-wide association studies. So the first of these studies that we call GWAS, GWAS, which is the abbreviation for Genome-Wide Association Studies. So those were first published in 2005. I think at the time, they thought it was sort of like a long shot that they were going to examine thousands or millions of individual DNA variations across hundreds or thousands of people, and maybe using this type of approach, they would be able to find regions of DNA variation that were associated with disease. And at the time, it had never been done before, so people weren't sure if it would work, but it turns out that it worked really well. Like, I would say better than people expected. I think better than I would have expected. And we've been basically doing this over and over again in more and more people, now up to like millions of people for the past 10 or 15 years now. We found the DNA variation that's predictive of disease. We've also been able to replicate those results. So actually like collecting new samples and redoing the studies and actually find the same variants again. But in terms of actually translating those discoveries into knowledge that's like useful for doctors or developing drugs or anything has been a lot more challenging. So all of that is just quite surprising to me. In terms of my role, I would say before I had this job for as long as I've had it, I would have imagined that my job was to be an expert at the science part and that's it, just because that's what I was most excited about doing. So maybe in terms of what my role is actually maybe was surprising is that a lot of my role is about interacting with large numbers of people and managing those relationships and making sure that we communicate what's going on in certain projects at a certain time, because these are projects that require lots of people's skills and input. We also need to continually communicate with all the different members of our team. One of the things we'd love to do is kind of find a way to use all of those DNA variants that we've identified and turn them into improvements in healthcare treatment and prevention. For example, some drugs that have already been approved for prevention of kidney disease or lipid lowering medications that people didn't have before the GWAS era. Right now, there are only a couple of examples of those. So, we'd love to see more of those examples of actual treatments that come out of the research that we're doing. Besides that, we also talk a lot about precision medicine. When you know people's entire DNA sequence, the other aspect we talk about a lot is developing personalized treatments where you can look at an individual's genome and their whole DNA sequence and say, based on your particular DNA sequence, that maybe there's a specific type of treatment that would work better for you than it would for other people. So this is something people talk about a lot. We're not really there yet. We do have pretty good progress in terms of an area that we call genetic risk scores. How genomic DNA predicts your risk of disease could be relevant for European ancestry people, but for other ethnicities, actually those predictions might not work very well. But this is something our field is working on improving in a few ways. So one of the ways we're doing this is by collecting more DNA samples from diverse ancestry individuals, with the idea that if we do more genetic studies in diverse ancestries, then we can also build better genetic risk prediction models for diverse ancestry people. One of the things that I find really rewarding is sort of expanding what we're doing to more diverse ancestry individuals. We have a few sort of really interesting technical or methodological advancements, basically by combining both gene expression and DNA variation together from diverse ancestry people in order to improve personalized healthcare for more diverse ancestry individuals. The other major thing that I find rewarding is doing my research together with people that I'm mentoring, graduate students and also postdocs. So right now I'm mentoring a few different people in terms of advancing their careers as researchers, which I found really rewarding because I think as I've been in this field more and more, I've come to realize it's really exciting to advance the science, but at the same time, sort of science advances pretty slowly. So I think in order to keep science alive and growing, there's only so much I can do as an individual. And I think in order to increase my contribution and give back to the field of research, actually I can accomplish more by mentoring other people so that they can develop their careers and their scientific ideas. Work-life balance is a challenge for everybody. If you're sort of a driven person and you want to do a lot career-wise, then you're always going to feel busy at work, and that feeling will never go away. I've known people who sort of thought well, I'm so busy at work, so I'm going to put off these fun things that I want to do in life until I've accomplished these other things that I want to do at work. And in my opinion, that doesn't work for me anyway. If you put off important life events in order to accomplish something in your career, it's unnecessary delay. And then later on, maybe you want to do those fun things in life and you realize oh, maybe they're taking away from your career at that point as well. So I think you sort of just need to accept the fact that those things need to coexist and not worry about it too much. There are always moments where sort of work gets in the way of family life and vice versa. But I think generally I just try to say you shouldn't let your career interfere with your family goals and life goals. I think it's really important to build a solid technical foundation early on because I think it's just harder to develop those skills later on. I think that's why graduate school, for a job like mine, is so important because you get those few years to concentrate and really develop your technical skill foundation. I didn't realize this as a grad student, but after finishing, you never really get that much time to kind of sit back and think deeply about your technical skills and developing them further. So I think having a solid foundation early on definitely helps. First, our field is really diverse. So, whether you like to do more computing heavy work or more like lab work, you want to be more of a researcher or an educator or working with patients, the field needs all of those different types of scientists. So, you can keep all of those things in mind as potential career options. And yeah, just kind of like pay attention to the trends in the science. So our field moves very quickly. Definitely keep up with the direction of the field and what you think would be the most impactful direction for you, also matching with what you find interesting and also what would be useful for the field.